Joe Ramirez was 64 years old, and he had been working as a janitor at Wilson's auto shop for nearly 12 years. Every morning he arrived before sunrise, coffee in one hand and his old metal lunchbox in the other, and every night he was the last one to leave, making sure the shop floor was spotless. He never complained, never asked for a raise, never demanded recognition. To the younger mechanics, Joe was just the janitor, a man with gray hair under a green cap, a quiet smile, and the patience to clean up the endless trail of oil stains and discarded parts they left behind. But what none of them knew was that Joe had a past. A past filled with engines, gears, and more horsepower than most of them could imagine. Long before the broom, Joe had been a mechanic himself, one of the best in his time. In his 20s, he built street racing engines that dominated the underground circuits in California. In his 30s, he worked on custom designs for military vehicles. In his 40s, he even ran his own shop until tragedy struck. His wife died suddenly, and Joe, heartbroken, walked away from everything. He buried his past under silence and took the janitor job at Wilson's just to keep himself busy and distracted from the pain. The younger guys at the shop had no idea. To them, Joe was just another background character in their daily grind. They joked at his expense, made little comments about his age, and sometimes even mocked him when he gave them quiet suggestions about cleaning up or being careful with certain parts. Joe never fired back, he just swept, nodded, and kept working. But that would all change one Friday afternoon. It started when a wealthy businessman pulled up in a cherry-red Lamborghini Aventador, the kind of car that turned heads instantly. The owner stormed into the shop, frustrated, saying no one in town had been able to fix his problem. The car had an intermittent stalling issue tied to its complex electronic fuel injection system, and every mechanic he'd gone to had failed. Wilson, the shop owner, eager for the challenge and the payday, promised they'd get it done. The crew gathered around the car like kids at a candy store, eager to prove themselves. Hours passed, and nothing worked. The mechanics argued, replaced parts, ran diagnostics, scratched their heads, and still, the car coughed and died every time it was tested. Sweat dripped down their foreheads, their confidence shrinking as the owner grew angrier by the minute. By sunset, frustration filled the air. That's when Joe walked by with his mop bucket. He paused, leaned against the handle, and watched them struggle. Something about the sound of the engine caught his ear. He tilted his head, listening, his mind quietly running through old patterns, old lessons, old instincts. Finally, he spoke softly, "It's not the injectors. It's the synchronization relay. You're chasing the wrong thing." The room went silent. Then laughter erupted. One of the young mechanics, Kyle, smirked. "Come on, Joe, what do you know about Lamborghinis? You're the janitor, man. Go grab a mop, not a wrench." The others chuckled, shaking their heads, dismissing him entirely. But the car's owner, desperate and losing patience, narrowed his eyes. "Let him try," he said firmly. The shop went dead quiet. The mechanics froze, unsure if the man was serious. Joe didn't move either, until the owner walked right up to him, pulled a crisp $100 bill from his wallet, and slapped it into his hand. "Fix it. If you can." The laughter got louder. One mechanic leaned over and whispered, "This'll be good." Joe didn't flinch. He calmly set his mop aside, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked toward the car. His movements were slow but confident, the kind of steps only a man who had lived in garages his whole life would take. The mechanic stood back, arms crossed, ready to watch him fail. Joe popped the hood, leaned over the engine, and listened again. His hands traced the wires, the connections, the sensors. He closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded to himself. Without saying a word, he asked one of the boys to hand him a small screwdriver. They hesitated, but the owner barked, "Give it to him." Reluctantly, they obeyed. What happened next stunned everyone. In less than 15 minutes, Joe isolated the faulty relay, bypassed it temporarily, recalibrated the fuel injection timing, and brought the engine to life. The Lamborghini roared like thunder, smooth, powerful, flawless. The sound filled the entire shop, echoing off the walls, drowning out the silence of disbelief. The younger mechanic's jaws dropped. Kyle, who had been the loudest critic, stepped back with wide eyes, his mouth opening but no words coming out. The owner's face lit up with sheer joy and relief as he listened to his car purr like it had never purred before. Joe just stood there quietly, wiping his hands on the rag again, his face calm, almost uninterested. For him, it wasn't about showing off. It was muscle memory, instinct, knowledge he carried like second nature. He handed the screwdriver back and stepped aside as if nothing had happened. The room stayed silent until the owner spoke. "This man," he said, pointing at Joe, "just did in 15 minutes what none of you could do in 5 hours. Respect him." The words hit the crew like a hammer. From that day forward, everything changed. But the story didn't end there. Word spread about Joe's miracle fix. Customers started asking for him by name, even though he wasn't officially a mechanic. The shop owner, Wilson, began urging Joe to take on more repair work, but Joe always shook his head. "I'm just the janitor," he'd say softly. Still, his quiet wisdom began guiding the crew. Slowly, the young mechanics who once mocked him started asking him questions, listening carefully when he spoke, and realizing that every piece of advice carried decades of experience. Then came the twist nobody expected. Months later, a rival shop owner, furious that Wilson's auto shop was getting all the attention, showed up one night after closing. He accused Joe of being a fraud, saying it was all luck, a trick, nothing real. The confrontation turned ugly, but Joe didn't argue. Instead, he invited the man to bring any car, any engine, any problem. The rival scoffed but agreed. The next day, a challenge unfolded. A heavily modified Dodge Charger with a custom twin-turbo setup rolled in, its engine plagued by issues no one had been able to solve. The rival mechanic smirked, arms crossed, certain Joe would fail in front of everyone. But Joe didn't flinch. This time, though, it wasn't about proving himself. It was about teaching the young mechanics who had started to believe in him. He gathered them around, explained every step, broke down the logic, showed them not just what to do but why it mattered. Piece by piece, he guided them through the repair until the Charger thundered to life, louder and stronger than ever before. The rival's face turned red. He stormed out without a word. The shop erupted in cheers. For the first time in years, Joe smiled, a real, wide smile that carried warmth and pride. Not because he had one, but because he had reminded himself that he still mattered, that the knowledge he carried could shape the next generation. From then on, Joe wasn't just the janitor. He was the mentor, the hidden master of engines, the man everyone respected. The young mechanics learned more from him in 6 months than they had in years of training. And though Joe never put his name on the sign or took the spotlight, everyone in town knew the truth: the old janitor was the heart of Wilson's auto shop. And all of it had started the day they laughed when he tried closing. And that's the story of Joe, the auto shop janitor who shocked everyone by fixing an impossible problem. Never underestimate the quiet ones, they just might carry more wisdom and power than anyone realizes. Now I want to know, from which part of the country are you watching this video? Drop it in the comments below, I can't wait to hear from you.